Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Christine Marie.
And I'm Charley Zhang.
And this is our Soulful Dialogue series, where two soul sisters come together each month to share what's alive in our hearts and explore the beautiful messiness of being human.
Through intimate, unscripted conversations, we dive into questions both big and small around self-discovery, spiritual growth, and awakening the medicine that lives within each of us to create a more conscious and compassionate world.
We're here to bridge ancient wisdom with raw vulnerability, the sacred with the everyday. So settle in, open your heart, and welcome to the journey.
Hi there. Hi. Hello.
I was thinking wow, we haven't recorded in a while. It's been almost 2 months, I think.
2?
Well, we usually record in the beginning of the month. Things and schedules, we're almost at the end of the month, so it's been about 2 months.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Time flies. That's
I know.
Yeah, same.
I was sitting with the energy and the theme of this podcast episode. That term unconventional life kept ringing in my ear, and I just started to contemplate about what it actually means to live an unconventional life. What does that represent in our society and our culture? And I'll start off by saying I feel like there might be a misconception of an unconventional life means you just travel the world and you reject society and you live off grid or you don't have your typical 9 to 5 life. And I think those can be ways of living an unconventional life, but I also feel like it means something deeper. And for me, as I was sitting and reflecting on this theme, I feel like living an unconventional life to me represents really choosing alignment, to be in alignment with your passion, with your truth, with what's calling you forward, even if on the outside it might not be accepted or approved by others. And I feel like that takes such deep courage and deep self-trust to follow your heart without taking in the noise and the opinions and judgments around you. And I feel like when you choose that path of following the aligned way forward without really knowing what it's going to be, you kind of decide, well, I'm going to trust where I'm going is supportive without actually having a clear roadmap in front of you. So I'm just kind of opening up the Pandora's box of what I've been sitting with, and I'm curious for you, Charley, what shows up in your system, in your mind, and your heart when you think about living an unconventional life, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. I love this topic because it's a theme that I've been sitting with for the past year. And I guess the first thing that really comes to mind when I hear you open up in that way is, for me, it's almost like the label doesn't matter, right? Like whether it's conventional or unconventional. Because one of the big things that I'm hearing you say is that it's about, is the life that you're living yours? Right.
Mm.
So the labels to me, I guess they're helpful to just sort of use as reference, but the bigger thing, the deeper thing that I'm hearing is the life that you're living authentic and true to you, whether or not it looks conventional or unconventional to
Mm.
externally, right? To people outside. So it's not about judging it one way or not, but is the life that you're living authentic, true to you, aligned, as you say, and also alive. And the thing that I've really been sitting with this past year has been that is choosing the life that feels like it wants to be lived through me. you know?
Mhm.
Um, and, I also have a separate podcast called Off Script. So that's almost another word that I would use for unconventional life is it's the off script life. It's the life that calls to you and the one that you accept to show up to. So those are some of the immediate thoughts that float in around that. And I think to your point, there's something about it takes a lot of bravery and courage to say yes to that, to say yes to an authentic, alive life because you are working against potential judgment, that whatever you're living may not be considered normal or standard, in any conventional way. Yeah, I think that it takes a lot of bravery and courage and agency as well to choose something like that for yourself. Yeah.
What's coming up for me as you share is the remembering that when I was a nurse and about 2 to 2.5 years into the profession, I really realized that that was not for me anymore. And that was a really big moment of grief and confusion and disorientation in my life. Um, but the knowing was so strong that no matter what I felt might be the consequence of leaving or the judgment or criticism or misunderstanding that I would receive from my coworkers or the people around me, like that knowing was everything because that's what got me through to continuing to trust and follow
Mm.
my heart compass. And I remember, sharing with people. I mean, it ended up being about almost 6 years till I left the profession, finding my way out of it. But during the last maybe year or two, I would hear remarks and responses from people. Well, are you sure? You're such a good nurse. Like, we would miss you so much. What would you do instead? You don't even know what you're doing, sort of thing. Like, so much of these projections and and also encouragement to like be in a place and an environment that was not speaking to me anymore. And that was really hard because there was a sense of family and community that I'd built within that environment that actually meant a lot to me. And I had to kind of choose what was more important or what was more aligned. Was it the environment, the community that I was living in that wasn't fully nourishing me in all the ways? Or was it this greater calling that I had no idea would be on the other end of? And it was terrifying.
Mm.
And I think back to that younger version of me and just like how courageous and brave she was, and also like how much of a roadmap she didn't have. Um,
Mhm.
and I think maybe there might be some opportunities for people if they're questioning whether or not they want to transition or leave or do something different, to consider the fact that there might not be a clear path forward, but you can follow the breadcrumbs laid out before you and trust that like wherever your journey leads you, that it will all flow and come together divinely timed, but you have to take the first step forward. So yeah, there's so much stirring up within me, and I don't think it's a path that everybody feels ready, but I don't really think you ever feel fully ready
Yeah.
to choose. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think what comes to mind for me is that there is timing built into it too. Sometimes you're not ready, but I feel like life has its own way with you sometimes. So, we were talking a little bit earlier about choice, and I think that's an important part of living the life that you want, living an unconventional life or living off script, however we want to talk about it, I think agency is an important aspect of that. But then I also think there's an aspect, sort of to what you were saying, right, of following the breadcrumbs, which is about letting go of the reins a little bit and see what the world has to offer you and what signposts it's showing you in your life where, you don't have to think too much or too hard about what life is going to become, because there's always this sense that I've had that life is just going to orchestrate itself regardless. And so you can show up to it consciously, or you can show up to it unconsciously, and we can show up with much intention and purpose, but also at the same time there's not a lot of control that we have either. And so there's an aspect of surrender and just listening to where life wants to take us that I think is really important, especially because I think that sometimes our human imaginations can be so limited. We just don't know what's possible because we're conditioned to think and feel in these really small ways. So what you were saying earlier about your friends reaching out and being like, "Are you sure this is the path for you?" And there was just sort of the sense of skepticism and like rational care, right? Like there was care, but I think that people were insinuating, like, is this a rational choice? And it just, when I heard that, the immediate feeling and thought that I had was that just feels like a projection of their limited imagination, right? Like that they think that this is the only path that makes sense, that has the most value. And I think the exciting thing about pursuing an unconventional life or going off script is that you're putting yourself into the role of explorer and discoverer. And again, like that takes a lot of courage and bravery, but I also think that that position, that posture really opens you up to a lot more than you could ever possibly imagine. And I think that's such an asset to have, to be someone who's open to surprise, who, yes, shows up intentionally and with purpose, but also is willing to be led in a way
Mhm.
and to be receptive to life arriving for you, if that makes sense.
It kind of reminds me of like the theme of free will versus divine will,
Mm,
of like that agency, that sovereignty, that responsibility to choose to create your own reality. And also, we have the chills, and also this beautiful tapestry of receiving life's blessings and opportunities and doors opening that you could possibly not have imagined or created yourself, because it simply is there for you to just receive, not necessarily design or orchestrate. And I feel like for me, I the only reason why I was able to say yes in moments when I felt terrified of following those breadcrumbs was all of the signs that were pointing me in the direction, in the dream world and the natural world, and photos and images and listening to my body and all those small signs that when I would ask for clarity or confirmation, it was like an absolute yes. I noticed my mind would go into doubt and fear of like, well, but what if this and what if that? And it's like, you don't actually have to worry about that, because you will be held, since the signs are all pointing the arrow north.
yeah.
And I just feel like the more that you can strengthen your ability to acknowledge and be aware of those signs, the better off you'll feel and the more supported you will feel making maybe a major life decision
Mhm.
that you might not necessarily feel 100% ready for, but is like a part of your next phase of transformation.
That's moving toward aliveness.
Mm.
And, sometimes I think that, well, first off, there's moving toward aliveness, and to your point, like finding those places that light you up, that give you a sense of energy, that motivates you. But sometimes I also think that life changes really happen when the pain of this pain and suffering that goes with staying the same is greater than the pain and the discomfort of trying something new and doing something new, if that makes sense. Like there's that tension sometimes. Like I think about my previous self and working in brand strategy, working for advertising company, and I'm at this place now where I could go back to that. That's certainly available for me, but the pain and suffering that goes with that is so much greater than the discomfort of staying in uncertainty, of continuing to feel out, what is the thing that wants to organize around my life. Like there is, it's still to this day, it feels a little bit fuzzy and foggy, although it's also become a lot more clear. Like there's just, with the intuitive readings and with the somatic coaching, there's aspects of this path that feel a lot more solid, but still very foggy, right? But that discomfort of not knowing pales in comparison to the discomfort that I feel of going back to
Mhm.
brand strategy or going back to full-time work. Like there's just something about that. When I think about that, I just want to crawl out of my skin. And so
Mhm.
even that, knowing that, it allows me to show up to the discomfort of uncertainty in a more resourced way, in a way
Yeah.
where it's like, I know
Yeah.
this discomfort I'm willing to take on and handle because somehow it still feels more alive and better than the other option, which does have its stability and it has its predictability, and there's a lot of benefit that I would get if I went back to full time, but again, it's like I would rather choose not knowing than the sort of, yeah, the suffering and the discomfort that I feel of staying or going back.
I mean, what you talked about feels like a threshold moment of like, I cannot unknow, unsee, unfeel all of that despair, suffering, or misalignment that I feel in my body. Like I can't not know or unknow that or unfeel that. And so
Mhm.
I feel like you've moved through the threshold of like, well, I'm going to just then go into the bardo, into the abyss, into the unknown, feeling like uncomfortable and oh, this is unfamiliar territory, but at least I'm not swimming in, energy that feels soul draining or exhausting or completely misaligned. And
Mhm.
I feel like when I think about like symptoms or signs that maybe somebody might be heading towards that threshold moment, could be like you mentioned, this feeling of suffering or exhaustion. I also feel like physical symptoms might start to show up. I know I have seen that within myself and many clients that I've supported of like you might start getting like autoimmune things or
Mm.
you might start to feel like your body is shutting down or your immune system is, pressing pause. Like there might be even more signs from a physical standpoint that you've reached your limit in an environment that's no longer resonant with you.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important to pay attention to because our body's always speaking to us wisdom and pointing to us maybe towards things that we're not paying attention to,
Mm.
or we need to see more clearly, or to be more honest with ourselves about actually how we feel and what needs to change in order to bring that resonance back online.
Yeah.
Uh, did you ever have symptoms or moments where you noticed that like your body was responding to your level of dissatisfaction in your work?
I wouldn't say they were necessarily big health symptoms, but I would say for me, there's a particular way that my nervous system feels really stretched and maxed out when what I'm doing feels incongruent with me. And
Mhm.
because I know that I'm someone who loves to move on the slower side of things. I love to slow down. I love to take my time. I love to reflect, and there are times where I'm just in a very nonverbal state. Like I'm feeling a lot, and there's not a lot of desire to have to speak or say things. Like, those are the environments where I really feel like myself, where there's no rush, there's no agenda. And then when I think about working in advertising, it's like every part of me is doing the opposite of what I naturally want to do. So I'm forcing, I'm striving, I'm verbalizing everything. I need to move at this really quick pace because I need to demonstrate in the room that I know what I'm talking about. And that, for me, the symptoms of that is just feeling like really disoriented and disconnected from my body, actually. Like, so much is happening in my mind of, I need to do this, I need to show that, I need to say that to impress this client, and I need to get this done to, and there's so much busyness in the head that I actually end up feeling really disconnected from my body, and I sort of feel like I lose my place with myself, and I lose my place with the world, and I just don't feel like myself. And I think over time, that incongruence and that being out of self creates, yeah, for me, it created almost like a dissociated feeling. So that was really what it created for me, staying long term in those spaces that felt really incongruent. I dissociated, and just didn't feel like I was properly landing in the present and properly connecting with things, because these were things that I simply didn't care about or wanted to care about. And like, when I say that, it's like, what a sad existence to live, right? To do things that you don't even care about. Why even waste your time doing things or spending time on things that you don't care about? And so, kind of coming back to this overall topic of unconventional life, or just life that feels like you, that to me just feels like the just such a obvious thing to say, right? Like, the point of life is to spend it doing the things that you care about. But so much of us don't, because we're told that we should be caring about other things, that these other things are important, but that's not always necessarily true for who we are, right? So, yeah, anything come up for you as you hear me say
So
that?
much. Something that I've been grappling with and trying to pull apart are the systems that tell us that we should follow a certain yellow brick road in our life, right? Go to college, get the degree, get your job, work for the system that you went to college for. Like, there is a conditional agreement with culture that this is what a happy, conventional, beautiful, successful life looks like. And if you don't do it this way, well, then you're doing it wrong. Like, that's the story that I see embedded in so much of our subconscious. And so I feel like when I think about that piece, what I feel really passionate about is creating and building new systems that teach something different. That it's not about, oh, follow this certain roadmap
Mhm.
and then you'll be happy and successful and joyful. It's actually, what would it have looked like for our education to have taught us to actually connect with the things that we were passionate about or really good at when we were young? And I think about that for me,
Mhm.
of like, oh man, I wish I would have been able to take like a psychic development class, in middle school, or instead of going to fucking geometry. Oh my God, I hated math. Like, doing all like these things that essentially set you up so that you could feed the system that makes that system money and productive and all that, versus what about, yeah, teachers, leaders, educations that say, oh, I see you for actually a holistic whole person with a certain purpose in this world. Let me point you towards those North Stars and get you into the things that you actually care about, you know how much different our world would be? Like, if we were all actually doing the thing that we know in our hearts that we came here to do fully.
Yeah.
I believe that there's so much possibility there of change and impact and growth in our global circumstances that I would love to see change and different. And so
For sure.
I think there's so much there, but at least we can start by, you're never too late. Like,
Totally.
I just saw a woman that's like in her 60s starting to learn how to DJ.
I love that.
And she's like, "Oh man, I finally found my like calling after all these years of being so disconnected from it."
Mhm.
So you can start at any age, and it just takes some conscious awareness and maybe a little bit of guidance along the way to show you you're able to do anything that you want, that you desire in this world, and that you will be rewarded
Yeah.
even so much abundance,
Mm.
love, companionship, community, whatever it is that you're searching for, like that will start to show up even more so when you're aligned and more resonant with
Mhm.
your true self.
I'm being reminded of a meme I saw a while back that said something to the lines of, "Job market is so bad, you might as well start following your dreams." And I think that
Exactly.
true. I do think that we are seeing some of that happen right now. I feel like we're in this incredible moment of change and flux where the old rules are changing. And I think a lot of people, whether it's through layoffs or other sorts of disruption, I feel like a lot of people are having their own rebirth moments and really starting to reckon with the fact that that old formula of go to school, get a job, retire, blah 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 blah, like there's really no reward in that anymore, or the promise of that formula is crumbling right now. And the reason why that formula was effective in the past was because it actually delivered on the promise. People got their stability, people got their security and their economic status from doing all of these things, but all of those institutions are crumbling right now through AI, through layoffs, through global and economic volatility. So right now, I feel like is a very ripe opportunity to reinvent and try things out and experiment. And I feel like collectively we are in that moment of experimentation. I think you and I are definitely participants in that. I'm sure that thousands of other people are participants in that. And I think we're still proving out whether this is, I feel like what's important is that people are exploring and they're showing up and they're saying yes to the discomfort of uncertainty. I'm just really curious because I know that we're talking a lot about the possibility and some of the pros of chasing and following your dreams, but I'm curious, like, where are the places that you struggle with being in alignment? Because it's not gonna be all roses, right? So I wanna understand a little bit where it is challenging.
Yeah, I actually think it's more challenging than kind of being on autopilot. I feel like the most challenging parts that I've seen within my own life and within those that I walk alongside of is a lot of the honest truth that comes from really just being with yourself,
Mhm.
really being with the dissonance that lives inside of your body, inside of your nervous system, being with a lot of the pain and sometimes the loneliness that can uh, come up because I feel like as you start to realign, you lose friends. You lose people and places and community that you once felt nourished by or nurtured by. Um, and the grieving process is real. I've been going through that for these last 6 months with, a redirection of my time and energy and focus with, a community that I really invested a lot of myself in. And But it was that threshold moment of staying here was going to actually limit me from being more in alignment than
Yeah.
where I was being headed. And so I had to make that choice. And I'm still grieving the loss of it all. But I think one thing to just, remind people as they consider making a change or following a life of more truth is that grief will always be there to meet you, but you can learn how to hold it and nourish it and be with it. And it doesn't have to completely derail you. That in itself is a teacher. So, yeah, I think that's probably one of the hardest things. And I remember when I left nursing and I was just beginning my business, doing my healing arts work, and I was in debt. I was barely able to make my bills paid for, and all of my poverty and scarcity money wounds from childhood came up that I hadn't looked at. And so I do think like the more you choose alignment and living a life that's yours, the more maybe those past wounds or subconscious beliefs may show up for you to heal, for you to reinvent a new story so that that doesn't have to be like the ending of your chapter. And so that was really hard. I remember I was dating Josh at the time. We weren't living together. And I called him one day. I was at the park sobbing, feeling like, oh my God, my life is ending. I'm going to live on the street. Like, what am I doing? Like, all of those doubts and insecurities came. And I called him and I was like, you need to come and because I'm going to lose it. And he just came and held me. And all I needed was that part inside of me to feel seen and held and loved and just told like it was going to be okay,
Mm.
you know? And yeah, I think those moments, you can't bypass, but I think that's what makes it so much more beautiful is that you get closer to healing perhaps all of those old wounds that is actually keeping you from being in that alignment in the first place. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's really challenging and overwhelming at times, but I feel it's a part of your next up-leveling of your potential, of your medicine, of your authentic power.
And the word that I want to say is you become so much more of a multidimensional person when you move through those wounds and you heal those wounds or not even heal. Like I feel like heal is such a misnomer sometimes that people take as fixing or eliminating. But I think to what you're saying, it's really about coming into dialogue with those parts of yourself in more compassionate ways. And sometimes, I don't know, I just feel like our core wounds never go away. I don't think they can ever be fixed, but I think that our capacity to hold them with more compassion and love is greater as we heal, so that those wounds don't dictate what we do or how we live our lives, which is the unconscious part, right? So I think choosing the aligned life is walking into greater consciousness of yourself. And again, I think it comes back to agency is, all of those parts of yourself, the light and the dark can exist, but you get to choose which part you get to live through.
Yeah, which part is taking the steering wheel?
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I do believe that our core wounds can be healed.
Mm.
I completely understand what you're saying about how that healing is really about bringing it to the conscious, having a dialogue. I do feel and believe and have seen in my own life, like the transmutation, the alchemy of those wounds no longer, having control over my psyche, having control over my body, my life, my relationships, all of that. I see what you're saying. So I think we both agree in the way that we see it. And a certain level, and I do think, maybe there's a little disagreement there, but it's all good.
Yeah, and that
We
might
don't have to
be a
do anything.
conversation for another time.
Let's definitely open it up again one day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, this feels really juicy and lovely and always, a topic that I feel like you and I can go down and spend hours, conversing about. But is there anything, one last thing maybe that you want to share or close us out with when it comes to this topic?
I think the thing that I keep coming back to is our time is precious, and we do get to decide how we spend that time and what we fill that time with. And I keep going back to what we were talking about earlier is that just feels like the point of life is to spend it doing the things that we care about and spending it with the people that we care about. Why do anything on the contrary? It just makes no logical, rational sense. So I think it's just, yeah, encouragement for anyone listening to reflect on that and reassess where they're at and reassess the balance of things in life. Is life tipped more on that side of, yeah, these are the things I care about and I'm investing time and energy in that, or am I investing time and energy in things I don't care about? And yeah, looking at that balance. Life isn't perfect. There's going to be plenty of moments and times where we have to do things that suck and that do drain us, but I don't want to say that those are things that we can fully eliminate because life is life. But I do think that there's a way that we can look at it, which is about the overall balance. And again, moving towards more of that aliveness seems to be the goal. So, yeah, that's what comes up for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Charlie. I love that. Let's end there.
Okay,
Let's
sounds
do it.
good. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, for chatting with us. And we'd love to hear if any of this resonates or how it resonates or doesn't resonate. And I are just grateful to be able to share these conversations and hopefully connect with you all through them. So thank you so much.